Hi, this is Ron Heiniger. I'd like to talk to you about the weather forecast for wheat for 2021 into 2022, and also about some tips on how to use management along with weather to improve wheat yield and profit for this coming year. So let's jump right in. I don't want to take a lot of your time here. First of all, I'm going to talk about 4 tips. And the first tip is to set as many leaves on the wheat plant as quickly as possible. It takes 3 leaves before the plant makes a tiller. Each productive tiller should have 4 to 8 leaves by the time the wheat plant starts joining in March. Ideally, each main plant should have 10 to 14 leaves, which means we should have 3 to 4 tillers per plant in an ideal situation. So what does it take to make these tillers and make them quickly? Well, it takes temperature primarily, but also the proper nutrition early in the season. Why is this important? Let me just pop my head out of here just for a moment. It's important because early tillers contribute the most to yield. Early tillers make more kernels per spike. Those kernels tend to be heavier. Early tillers make up most of our yield. Now there's a downside to making tillers quickly. Early tillers have more leaves. That's a good thing. But they also require more light. We can't crowd them. They need water and nitrogen and are more likely to freeze. So that means that once you set the path for more tiller development, more leaf development, you're going to have to sustain that with nutrition and certainly enough water to support that plant. So as I said earlier, that tiller development is largely determined by temperature, and we can use nitrogen and particularly phosphorus at planting to speed up tiller development in times in which we don't have the temperature to make that happen. So now we come to the forecast. So how is temperatures going to be here in the fall? How can they contribute to tiller development? Let's take a look at what this forecast is. We'll do a little deep dive here. We often talk about the major influencer of our temperature patterns as being these La Nina, El Nino patterns. So here we see graphs of the surface temperature, surface water temperature of the Pacific Ocean off of not El Salvador, off of Peru, Ecuador. So you can see on August 2020, the orange area indicated that temperatures were above normal. But by July and August, those temperatures, water temperatures, were rapidly declining, and we had a trend toward a La Nina year in 2021, which indeed, as you can look at the August 2021 graph, did occur. You could see those water temperatures were extremely cold by the time we got into January, February. And only toward the middle of the year did they moderate toward a more neutral period based on these surface water temperatures. I always wait until August to make my predictions because of this very fact. It's not until August that we start to see what these trends are starting to look like. And you can see in August of 2021 here that again, water temperatures are starting to decline. So they build up to sort of a neutral, and now they're declining again. So what this tells me, as well as the other scientists that looked at this, is that we're in toward another La Nina year in 2022. So again, some of the same trends that we looked at last year are going to be somewhat similar to the trends we see in 2022. So this is just the basis for making the prediction that our INSO period will be another La Nina in 2022. So what does that mean for us as we look at our climate? Well, let's dive in here and see what this weather forecast trends toward. Again, as I've already mentioned, La Nina returns for a second year. This is not unusual. This has happened before. El Niños have occurred over multiple years. La Niñas can as well. We have a 70% chance of a La Nina event. You saw that trend in those water temperatures last year. The difference, however, in 2022 is that we have a strong Bermuda high. You see that this year in how it steered the Hurricane Henri, how it steered Fred into the Gulf of Mexico. We're seeing a very strong high pressure ridge set up over the eastern states of the United States, and that's likely to remain so. What that means is that we're not going to see the dramatic weather changes that we saw last year, where we had a very weak Bermuda high. For instance, you remember in May it was very dry, and then all of a sudden all of a sudden it started raining and the weather turned colder. That's a weak Bermuda high that changes very rapidly. We're not going to see that this coming year. So these are going to be gradual changes that we talk about. Excuse me. So what's the outlook? Well, the continuation of this mild or even hot weather until late October. Certainly, we're seeing these periods of rainfall. That's going to continue because we have a higher than normal chance of tropical storms or hurricanes in the Atlantic or the Caribbean. Now, hopefully, this high pressure ridge will keep them from coming up the coast. So we're going to see some rain, but also some drier periods. And I think one of them is starting right now in late August, and it's going to extend through into mid-September. Now, don't expect this to continue. We're going to see a slow change to colder weather, starting certainly late October, but certainly in November, we're going to see lower and lower temperatures, and that's going to go right into December, into January, and build into February. It's going to be cold. It's going to continue these rainy periods, certainly in that cold weather in January, February, probably more freezing precipitation that we'll be looking for. So a trend toward cold weather starting in early November into February, and it just continues to get a little colder over that time. Then by the end of February, we'll see this shift slowly back, and we'll start to see above average temperatures starting in early March and continuing to April. So the dry period this coming year will be in March and April, not May or April and May. So that's what you're looking for, is a little earlier dry weather than what we saw this spring. If we go on forward, we're looking at above average rainfall in May and June. In other words, that drier, hotter weather will give way to rainier and cooler temperatures. Again, it won't be as dramatic as we saw this past year. We'll just start picking up some more rainfall. We get some more into May, into June, with cooler and cooler temperatures. And then finally, by the midsummer, we're going to see this return toward an El Nino period, in which we're going to see hot, dry weather in July and early August. So that's a weather forecast. If we look for what that means for this step one in planting wheat, it means we need to tend to plant a little earlier. Whenever our North Atlantic Oscillation prediction is for cool, and that's what La Nina is cool, why we need to be planting our maturity groups earlier. So I'd like to get most of them planted by mid-November. Certainly not waiting like we did last year to plant some of that wheat into December. I think that's not going to work out very good for us this year. And I would like to see us put a little more seed down. It's again, anytime we have lower temperatures, we got to compensate by putting more plants out there because we're not going to have the temperature to develop the tillers. So that's the outlook. We need to continue what we sort of did in 2020, only sort of on steroids this year, to move to an earlier planting, a little more seed. So, given the weather forecast, planting dates will be important as they are every year. Look to get this wheat in by November 5th if possible. I certainly don't see any planting opportunities in December this year. Plant using the upper end of the recommended rates, and I do think as we get in toward November, using some starter fertilizer, a blend of nitrogen and phosphorus to promote some early growth. Let's look at what other steps we should maintain as we look at this weather forecast. Once we get to jointing, we want to maintain tiller development, prevent tiller decline. The good news here is that warmer, drier weather in March and early April should help us in trying to maintain tillers. We're not going to see those heavy rain periods that we had even last year. So we're going to try to maintain nitrogen and good growth. You see, loss of tillers is influenced by the rate of plant growth. The bottom axis here is change in biomass, so that's plant growth. So the higher the plant growth, you see, the more tillers we maintain. So that's what that data says there, is you need good growth to maintain those tillers on this plant. So nitrogen influences that. We need to make sure if we got good tiller development, we have plenty of nitrogen to support those early tillers, as I mentioned earlier. The right tiller growth, not too much. In other words, we don't want it rank, but not too little. So that's keeping the balance of nitrogen through that early jointing period is very important. Step number 3. Now we get into kernel development. As I mentioned last year, we want maximum nitrogen uptake and growth from boot stage to flag leaf. That determines how many kernels we're going to put on a spike of a wheat plant. You can see here's spike number as it relates to wheat yield. As we get up to these spikes of 60, 70 tillers per square foot, or spikes per square foot, however you want to label that, you see it levels out. You know, we're competing for light nitrogen. These plants are competing, so they're not going to put more yield on. What's going to make the difference once we have enough tillers is number of kernels per spike, and you can see this continues increasing yield as we increase the number of kernels per spike. So that's dependent upon having high concentrations of nitrogen in the flag leaf and upper leaves of the plant from boot stage to flowering, and rapid growth. Many of us achieved that this year. We had ideal weather conditions in April. We're looking at the same thing in 2022. So we provide a strong foundation of tiller, then we get rapid growth and nitrogen uptake from boot through flag. We increase kernel count. Finally, we want to keep this plant as green as possible, as long as possible. I like that last point here. Each day the wheat plant remains green is another 2 bushels per acre. That is good money in the pocket. So indeed, keeping growth and nitrogen, that's where rainier, cooler weather in May is going to help us. This year, it was dry. We shut down some of this wheat a little early. But this coming year, we're going to have the opportunity to keep this wheat plant greener longer in the season. Now, yes, we could see more rain in June, which could lead to more harvest difficulty, but at least we'll have the opportunity to get this kernels at the maximum weight. So just to wrap this up, early tillers are the most productive. We're going to want to plant early this year given this forecast, get this wheat off to a fast start, capture what temperature we can, and get as many tillers developed early as we can. The key to yield is the number of kernels. That good weather outlook for March and early April should help us achieve the maximum kernel number. We just need to make sure we have the nitrogen there to supplement that growth that we're going to get. And then finally, the amount of light a wheat plant can use during grain fill is all important. Keeping those leaves green as long as possible increases seed weight and yield. So I hope you've seen what the outlook is. I think a really good forecast for wheat coming up this fall and early next year into June. So go for it. I think we got another good opportunity for a profitable crop here in North Carolina.